And at 10, Springtrap. Now, this number is really meta and that's why it's starting off the list. But this isn't a metaphorical or philosophical number as if you thought it was going to be. Springtrap has literally killed other versions of himself in the Fazbear Fright story of In the Flesh from the 5th Fazbear Frights book Bunny Call. After Matt hadn't playtested a VR game he was working on for a few days called Springtrap's Revenge, he came back to find piles of dead Springtraps that the AI had somehow spawned in order to have something to kill. It's absolutely horrifying and it's just plain weird. Like, why would you spawn more versions of yourself in order to have something to kill? Like, isn't that just like a paradox? Like how you physically are unable to prevent yourself from being born, since if you do, you fade out of existence, but then you can't go back and prevent it. So like, you can't stop yourself from being born because then you can't stop yourself from being born. I mean, well, depending on what theories about time travel that you believe, whether you believe Back to the Future or Endgame. That also makes it impossible for your younger siblings to prevent you from being born, but the older ones can prevent the younger ones because they'd still be alive before you were conceived. So watch out, Jordan. And at 9, Hudson. Hudson is the protagonist of What We Found, the 3rd story in the 8th Fazbear Frights book Gumdrop Angel. Hudson has short blonde hair with a pale beard and blue eyes. He also has straight white teeth. He has bruises and burns all over his body. He's 6'1" and skinny. Almost like me, except my teeth aren't white and I'm not 6'1", and I don't have a beard. But I have blue eyes and I'm skinny. Hudson is a security guard at the upcoming horror attraction of Fazbear's Fright. His life up to this point has been filled with nothing but tragedy. His father committed suicide and his mother remarried a man named Lewis who would physically abuse Hudson at nearly every chance he got. He also became the main target for bullies who would hold his head down while flushing a toilet. Hudson began to fail school, and instead of trying to help him, the teachers would instead call him names and tell him that he's dumb. Gotta love the public school system, am I right? The story would later reveal that Hudson's family home burned down with Lewis and his mother inside, killing them. While Hudson does burn in an oven at the end of the story, he was in essence driven there by Springtrap, who was the main antagonist of the story. So still a Springtrap victim. By the way, Hudson was also the one who set the fire that killed his mom and Lewis, so. And at 8, Jeremy. There aren't many glitch trap victims, so we can't really do one of those lists. But since Jeremy from FNAF VR was driven to suicide by Glitch Trap, who is William Afton's code form, I think it's close enough to deem a Springtrap killing. Jeremy from FNAF VR is the game tester who tested the game before Tape Girl, and is the one who Tape Girl found after he cut off his face using a guillotine paper cutter. This was thanks to William invading Jeremy's mind through the use of the VR game, which is still confusing to me, since unless you were connected in some form of Sword Art Online haptic suit, it shouldn't really be possible. We're only seeing the game with our eyes, not plugged in like the Matrix, but I don't know why I'm bothered by it. I mean, I'm literally talking about a game series where a man possessed by the spirit of a child exploded after somehow communicating while comatose, had then used his intense agony to possess a hard drive that then gets scanned to create an AI that allows this man to continue living. So I don't know why I'm getting caught up in semantics, honestly, but yeah. Jeremy. And at 7, Fritz. Fritz is also one of the original 5 missing children, being the victim who possesses everyone's favorite animatronic, Foxy. I guess in a way it was meant to be, given that both of their names start with an F and are shorter than their other names. The others actually also have similar names to their animatronics as well. Gabriel has the same amount of letters as Fazbear, Jeremy has the same amount of letters as Bonnie, and Susie and Chica have the same amount of letters as well. That's freaking weird, man. But not much else is known about Fritz. There originally was a theory that Fritz was a good guy who wanted to help the player in FNAF 1, but that was debunked in Ultimate Custom Night during like an April Fool's update or something, where Foxy's mechanics were changed to just like block one of the doors instead of kill you. Like, this was actually a joke though, since other mechanics were referencing other theories as well, like Phone Guy being Springtrap, and like, cause Springtrap couldn't be moving when Purple Guy was talking, as well as like Nightmare Freddy making you wake up from your nightmare, and that was referencing to Dream Theory. I mean, like, I wish I could wake up from this nightmare though. Oh wait, this is real? I talk about FNAF on the internet daily. That's actually a thing? I'm not having a nightmare? Oh great. And it's 6, Charlie. Okay, so in a way, Charlie in the Twisted Ones novel is a victim of Springtrap. And by in a way, I'm gonna have to suspend my disbelief because she was still a robot. While the original Charlie was killed by William Afton, in the Twisted Ones, one of the 4 robotic versions of Charlie gets snatched by a twisted animatronic and gets killed. Which only makes things more confusing when another version of Charlie, who is much older, shows up. But that's not the point. The point is that at this point, William had become Springtrap, and the twisted animatronics were his invention. So while yes, she was a robot, she was still a sentient robot who got snatched by an Afton creation after he had become Springtrap, so that's good enough for me. This was, like I said, actually harder than I thought it was going to be. William doesn't do much killing after becoming Springtrap, because he's locked in a room for 30 years. Most of the damage was already done at that point, so please forgive a few leaps in logic or suspension of disbelief, please. Thank you. High five doing at number 5, Vanny. Vanny is kind of a different victim in the sense that she isn't dead, but she has been controlled by Afton in the form of a mind virus that is just pretty damn ridiculous even for the FNAF series. But presumably getting caught by testing the FNAF VR game, or maybe through FNAF AR, she gets partially controlled by William. Hence the potential double personality that we see as hinted at through the FNAF AR emails, but this could also just be Tape Girl that we hear in FNAF VR, who is the one who gives you false information about how to beat Glitch Trap. Vanny, we know, is a victim of the purple guy since, well, he's been the only killer in the series up until this point, and she wears a fabric bunny suit, alluding to the fact that William had his spring bunny suit that turned him into Springtrap and, you know, the whole Glitch Trap thing. Gotta love them parallels. This is how serial killers are caught, though. Like, change your MO every once in a while. They only catch the stupid criminals, so don't be stupid. I mean, don't be a criminal. Especially, just don't do it. And at 4, Henry. Henry is another case that is kind of like victim adjacent. And not in a sense where he was a victim because he killed Charlie, like I said last time, but rather because Henry lets himself die in FNAF 6 in order to ensure that nobody remembers what William did. However, William does end up escaping, but Henry stayed put and let himself burn in the FNAF 6 fire because of Springtrap. And then it turned out that it was all for nothing, because nobody is standing in his way anymore. So honestly, while not directly killed by Springtrap or William, Henry is one of the biggest victims that William has. He took his family and his life, all for nothing, since it didn't actually put an end to his reign of terror. But maybe, like the ultimate custom night Samurai Freddy cutscene suggests, maybe Henry is also still alive, possessing an object looking to come back to keep pursuing that anime fox. At least, I wouldn't be surprised if Henry turned out to be Glamrock Freddy or something like that. And at 3, Cassidy. Cassidy is probably who you'd expect to be number 1 on this list. You know, the generally assumed, the one you should not have killed. The missing children's victim who went on to possess Golden Freddy. Cassidy is described in the novels as a young girl with long black hair, which is also the description of the only human to appear in the FNAF Survival Logbook, or Security Logbook, I call it both. The name Cassidy was also discovered in that book, when a Reddit theorist going by the username DPowerful1 took wrong or highlighted numbers from various pages and put those into word search in basic, like in coordinates, and then he ended up finding the name Cassidy, which has got to be the most complicated thing in history. Like, we dig through source code and we put audio files through goddamn spectrograms to try to find clues, but even this was too much for this series. Like, I don't know why I had to go and make things so complicated. And ultimately, in at number 2, Michael Afton. Now, this may be confusing to some of you since Michael doesn't die until FNAF 6, but come on, this guy is the biggest Springtrap victim of them all. Let's just recap what happens to Springtrap's own son, for God's sake. He kills his brother, assuming that's actually what happened. He then learns about his father's killing spree and tries to right his wrongs. While doing so, he is haunted by the spirits of the children his father has killed, and then learns about how his sister has possessed an animatronic after getting scooped so many years ago. Then he learns that he is probably a robot and gets ripped open by a scooping machine. After this, a giant robot amalgamation of parts fills his body and lets him bruise and rot while wearing him like a suit after Barney Stinson had a mental breakdown, and then he vomits that entire animatronic back out. Can you imagine how painful that would be? The 7-foot tall mass that is entered coming out of your throat. But somehow, he's still alive. Then he finds a job posting about a new Fazbear location and applies for it, but then has to salvage animatronics that include the thing that ruined his body, his long dead sister, one of his father's earliest victims, and his father, all of which may kill him if he's not on high alert. this man has suffered probably the most in the entire series. That's absolutely horrifying. Finally, in at number 1, William Afton. Yes, here we are again. While I already said Springtrap himself as the first number, I'm gonna round it off with some more self-reflection. Like I said, this list was hard. However, the most important victim Springtrap could have had would have been William Afton himself. Let's remember, Springtrap isn't a separate character. He is the body of William Afton that got spring-locked after he hastily put on his murder costume in the back room of an early Fazbear location after accidentally releasing the souls of his original victims. Whether it was to make them feel scared or to make himself feel more powerful, his haste coupled with the moisture from the leaking ceiling caused the spring lock mechanisms to fail, shooting thousands of metal parts deep into his body. It would have killed him if not for the spirit that had possessed him that was intentionally keeping him alive. That's brutal. I mean, he absolutely deserves it, don't get me wrong, but that has to be included on this list. I mean, I was told that William should have been on the purple guy victims list, so there you go. Here he is. And at 10, Crying Child. Okay, so I'm putting this one at number 10 because I personally don't think that the Crying Child is a Springlock victim. To me, there's just no logical way that that animatronic jaw should have crushed his skull, because, you know, the Springlocks were already active and that would require a lot of power to crush a skull anyway. However, it is possible that since this is a series about haunted animatronics possessed by spirit metal, that logic kind of gets thrown out the window. So assuming that he is a Springlock victim, that's brutally scary. Being thrown into an animatronic's mouth and crying so much that you make the jaw snap onto your own skull, killing you instantly? Holy crap, that is nightmare fuel. That's why some people are scared of robots or animatronics, and while it may not be realistic, the possibility of it happening is still horrifying to say the least, especially since not even that long ago he lost his sister to Circus Baby, and that's pretty messed up. And I'm sure that Michael, who put the kid in his mouth, as long as, you know, I'm wrong about my theory, he'd be scarred for life, and I think I would be too. Before we move on to number 9, can you do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet if you are looking forward to this list. I saw a load of comments asking for it, so this better not flop. If it flops, so help me, you will all have a reckoning. The more likes we get, the more likely we are to do a part 2, and it also helps us against the algorithm almighty and lets us grow the channel, which means more cool vids for you, so you know, it's a win-win, so thank you. And at 9, The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones novel starts a year after The Silver Eyes ended, with Charlie in university. One day, however, Clay Burke comes to see Charlie, and for some reason brings her to see a corpse with familiar wounds. This could either be because she would recognize them, or because she was working with the police, or because they had to advance the plot. I don't know, I haven't read the original novels, but I want to. However, looking at the wounds, she confirms that they are in fact a Springlock failure, meaning that we have an unnamed Springlock victim in the Twisted Ones novel. If this character does have a name, like if it's revealed in later down the line or something, please let me know, because I couldn't find one online. However, while this may seem insignificant to you, the real horror of this number comes from what it signifies. This Springlock marks the return of William Afton, since at the same time, Clay also tells her that a blood sample they took from Afton showed that the body was a fake, or at least it was fake blood. The return of a killer, and the purple guy of all of them, that's pretty damn scary if you ask me. And at 8, The New Kid. Continuing with the theme of FNAF books, what about the story The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the third Fazbear Frights book? The story revolves around Devon, Mick, and Kelsey. Devon and Mick are outcasts. They aren't popular, they aren't cool, but when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they make a new friend, despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone else in the school. Over time though, Devon grows jealous of Kelsey, since Kelsey has everything that Devon wants. So in an act of revenge or to gain control, because you know that's kind of serial killery, Devon hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a couple hours, to try to humble him, I guess. But the plan goes horribly wrong. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks fail, as expected, because you know this is a FNAF book, causing Kelsey's blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devon and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devon returns to make sure that Kelsey's body is still there, for some reason. He sticks his hand into the animatronic's mouth to feel if it's there, and snap! The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devon gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing a body in the suit, but with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. If that's not scary, then you need to go see a doctor, because that's bone chilling. That's messed up. No. And at 7, Lewis. Lewis was introduced in FNAF AR through emails that he's lucky he's the only one seeing, and not HR. Lewis is a creepy coworker of Ness who works at IT, at the company creating all the robots for the Fazbear Entertainment delivery service that we experience in Special Delivery. And he's probably the creepiest damn character in the entire series. Honestly, I'm surprised he hasn't been killed, especially if Ness is indeed Vanessa and Vanny, since he seems to be on to their little scheme. He's intercepted search queries and emails that just make Ness seem off, and straight up like a serial killer. Didn't she order like realistic human masks at some point? Anyway, if William had seen these emails addressed to Ness, he would feel required to take matters into his own hands and get rid of the guy who keeps spying on them. Unless this would be a similar situation to Henry, where the cops would look at these emails and see that he was harassing Ness and then maybe take her in for questioning. I mean, it's a realistic scenario. Ness feels threatened or annoyed by Lewis and then just gets rid of him. People have killed for less, and the contents of those emails is only more incriminating. Like, who orders realistic human faces? Aside from me. And at 6, Grim Chica. The first Springlock victim in the Final Nights series, Grim Chica is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. Unlike others, she is not a Reaper animatronic. Grim Chica holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit on the poster in the Night 3 cutscene, but her faceplates are very hard to spot and she's almost entirely purple. She really resembles Toy Chica. The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse. She lacks a bib unlike the original Chica, and her overall body is very slim like the original Toy Chica, except for her hips, which appear to be much wider. Got the baby birth in hips. I regret that immediately. And she lacks shoulders or upper arms, with her forearms protruding from her armpits. Grim Chica is also revealed to be a Springlock victim in the museum level, saying, quote, "A victim of a Springlock failure, forever forced to haunt the suit she is wearing, now being manipulated by your sister and mother. Tried spray on tan, still very pale." Why is that so relatable to me? Like, no matter what I do, I'll always be pale and pasty. Not the whole being manipulated by your sister and mother thing. That's weird. But like, I'm okay with forever being pasty. However, I did rank this above Grim Foxy because like, it's Chica. And look what they did to my girl Chica. I'm sorry, Mommy Kentucky, for the transgressions. Halfway through into number 5, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is used to describe the suit as a whole and the individual Springlock mechanisms that hold back all the robotic parts in the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the Shadow Animatronics came from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. And while there are holes in this theory, there is potential that this is the case. So the Shadow Animatronics are possible Springlock victims. I'm gonna have to keep saying that because people in the comments are gonna get mad. It's like, oh, they weren't Springlock. They could have been. It's possible. And that's the list, okay? And at 4, Golden Call. As a human, when alive, Golden Call's name was Kyle. However, he is now a Springlock victim stuck inside a Golden Freddy Springlock suit. Golden Call has the typical rundown Springlock suit vibe, similar to Springtrap. However, this is even more gruesome. His left ear is bent, he has guts coming out of basically every hole in his body, human eyes are hanging out of the animatronic's eye sockets. He's even missing exosuit on his right foot, and the character is holding a flesh-colored, at least it's flesh-colored, it may be even like fully like a flesh, phone in his right hand that stays stuck to his head via more flesh or blood strands connecting to the side of his head. It's horrifying, dude. This is a monstrosity. And looking at his age on the wiki, Kyle was only 5 when he got Springlocked, which is absolutely nuts and just flat out horrible. So unfortunate, man. He was supposed to be the next best Fortnite player. That's a joke for the long-term subs. You know it. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, us. We as the player in many of these games narrowly avoid death. sometimes with ease, sometimes by the skin of our teeth, like in the Baby Night Terror level of FNAF VR, where we are literally trapped in a closet that Baby could open at any time and kill us. Other times are less close, like if we see an animatronic right outside our window in FNAF 1 and need to quickly close the door before it gets us. But either way, there is no denying that we in every FNAF game are almost victims. Sometimes we even are victims, like in FNAF 4 where we die thanks to William pulling the plug, or in Sister Location where he gets scooped and stuffed with Ennard, or FNAF 6 where we willingly allow ourselves to be freed by the cleansing fire. No matter what, it's undeniable that we are some of the most resilient characters in the whole series. Normal people would see what they're up against and then quit day one. And then when asked about it at their next interview, they would say haunted animatronics were trying to kill me, so I quit. Simple as that, no other explanation needed. But we, as the players, stick it out for a week, and instead of quitting, we get fired, because we know what we need to do, and that's pretty admirable. Penultimately, and at number 2, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now. Everything was going well at first. They couldn't pin him down and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make himself truly immortal. So in an effort to study it further, William lures possessed animatronics to the back room that they can't access and uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims he claimed oh so long ago. Shocked, he tries to scare them by getting into his spring Bonnie suit, which also coincidentally makes him feel more powerful. However, this haste coupled with the leaking in the back room causes the spring locks to fail, crushing him in torturous agony for the next 30 years. However, he didn't die from this. As we learn in the Man in Room 1280, he was being kept alive by the spirit of another victim. So he was living that agonizing pain for 30 years. And that makes him damn well deserving of the number 2 spot. And before you ask, no, him and Garvey are 2 separate characters, meaning that they can both be included on this list. You're welcome. Finally, in at number 1, you. A spoiler alert for a fan game, and if I say which fan game, it's going to spoil it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, click away now. And thanks for watching. I'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, now that you've prepared for spoilers, A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by FizzNom on GameJolt. It released on April 25th, 2018, and since it was made by the same guy who is currently working on FNAF Plus for the Fazbear Fanverse, you know it's bound to be good. The gameplay of A Shadow Over Freddy's is a hybrid between a traditional point-and-click game and a free-roaming horror game. The player wakes up to find themselves with no memories in a black and white abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is tasked with surviving 5 nights in escaping the restaurant. The player is given a different task each night and must complete said task before 6 AM and without being attacked by any roaming animatronics. However, the ending of the game has you getting trapped in a spring-lock suit and left to rot, meaning that you are a spring-lock victim, which is probably the scariest victim of them all, cause I don't know about you, but I'd rather not get spring-locked. Although I know there are plenty of you that would just love that. You'd fill the suit with liquids that aren't blood, and that's messed up. Like, I'm not one for kink shaming, but yeah, there's kinks, and then there's like being killed, you know? I don't know how else to put that. And at 10, William Afton. Again, could William have suffered a spring lock failure before getting trapped in the spring Bonnie suit like we see in FNAF 3? It's possible, and it certainly appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described to have scars that are consistent with the spring lock failure before becoming Springtrap in the novels. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the spring lock suits were retired? Since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location, so is that unfortunate incident William? There are plenty of people it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission for a time. But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on when the room was wet like we see in FNAF 3's cutscene, it suggests that that's probably unlikely, but it's still possible. So since this list is possible springlock victims, I think he deserves to be on this list, at least at number 10, since can we really talk about springlock victims without mentioning good old Willie Afton? Exactly. And at 9, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case, because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before Silver Eyes starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve the spring lock failure, or something having to do with spring locks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, or maybe Baby has some spring lock mechanisms inside her when she killed Henry. Hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to because, well, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately, but it's still true. Henry dying doesn't really mean much to the overall FNAF lore, and we didn't even know he was alive until FNAF 6, so maybe for irony's sake Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way, rather than just, burning alive, because that sucks. Maybe he wanted to prevent himself from even more severe agony so that he didn't possess something. And it ain't Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sound of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know he dies, but other than that it's all speculation. One of the theories though is that animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a very painful death, especially since at this point the springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of the events of the springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have years for things like them getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one or maybe used it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just didn't want us to know that yet or something. I still feel like that might have been in the realm of possibility. Maybe not now, but it was. And at 7, Grim Fredbear. Grim Fredbear is one of the antagonists from Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. He's only active on night 5 and found in the left hallway. Grim Fredbear resembles the normal golden Fredbear suit, only with his suit glowing a deep purple while the interior of the suit glows a bright white. His upper face appears to be torn off, including his eyes, leaving an empty, hollow, gaping hole in its place. The inside of the mask, though it appears like there's nothing really inside, actually conceals a white, pale human head that can only be seen during his jump scare. And before you ask, yes, it's mine. The animatronic is clearly meant to be a reference to Shadow Freddy and the theory that the Shadow animatronics were springlock victims, which was later confirmed by Scott to be false when stating that William was the only victim of a springlock failure. And in the museum level, which unlocks after night 5, it is revealed that Grim Fredbear is a springlock victim, saying, quote, another springlock failure victim, the second generation of Fredbear. And at 6, Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that actually was a victim of a springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no harmful tendencies before this, so a springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a springlock failure, assumingly, would definitely provide enough power to do that, since the springlocks themselves would snap with such ferocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to do that thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics were suspended, because now one of their employees was bit and they had to promote him and fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So overall, whoever the Bite of 87 victim is could definitely have been a springlock victim. Halfway through in at number 5, William Afton. William does eventually kick the bucket, but even when his physical form dies, he comes back as sentient code in a video game, and isn't that the dream? Either way, this man narrowly avoids dying throughout the whole series. This man was possessed by a spirit that intentionally kept him alive through multiple instances that should have killed him, so I think if anything, this guy is the definition of almost victim. William doesn't even ultimately die until he allows himself to in the Fazbear warehouse in the Man in Room 1280, and even when his body explodes, he's still surviving through latching onto a hard drive that gets scanned into Help Wanted. And I have no doubts that he picked the one that would specifically be used, or one that he instructed someone else to use when making the VR game. At least if the game was planned before his demise. Seriously though, William survived a spring locking, the FNAF 3 fire, the FNAF 6 fire, and the constant assassination attempts from the hospital staff. So this guy is for sure making it onto this list. And at 4, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Her name was hidden for years, only really being discovered recently, and honestly we don't know too much about her. We don't know how she died, so the potential is there for her to be a springlock victim. Maybe William knew that it would be easier that way. After all, she does possess Golden Freddy, who we figure it was a springlock suit, that ended up having the guts removed, hence the slumped overness. However, if this was the case and Cassidy's body was in that suit, they would have found it when they were gutting him. But maybe William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. And I mean, like, to be fair, for a suit technician, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics that he literally designed, since, you know, he got snapped when the suit was wet. Either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim would help explain a lot in the series. Just, you know, the hallucinations and whatnot. And at 3, Am I Real? Am I Real, also known as Cake Bear, is presumably the primary and most recurrent antagonist in Dormitibus. Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where he delivered cake to children while a kid is murdered outside. He is the predecessor of both Fredbear and Freddy Fazbear. Cake Bear is a brown bear animatronic that also acts like a Springlock suit that appears in most of the main Nights. Although they do look similar, the only similarities he has to Freddy Fazbear in reality is that they both possess a top hat, are brown, have blue eyes, and are a bear. Am I Real's second form is a form that resembles Springtrap, however. This form has a green color much like Springtrap and contains human remains. His right eye socket has gotten bigger on the side and a big hole can be seen on the right side of his head. His top hat has received some withering on it as well, and his lower jaw is slanted and worn down, no longer circular like Cake Bear's. He also has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso, revealing organs. Ha, lovely. Rips and tears cover his arms, revealing more human remains. He also appears to be missing at least one finger on his right hand, and it's absolutely terrifying to look at. Of course, 3 out of 10 of these are going to be from Dormitibus. Like, what did you think was gonna happen? Did you watch the Dormitibus animatronics list? And ultimately, in at number 2, missing children. Much like the Cassidy situation, the entirety of the missing children involved in the missing children's incident may have been Springlock victims. We're still unsure as to the method of extermination that William used on the screaming pests. Sorry, the kids who run around in my building hallways they're still getting to me. If they ever go missing though, these videos are not going to help me. Anyway, we don't know how William dispatched of these kids before shoving them into the suits, and honestly, there may not be a way that he killed them before shoving them in. The act of putting them in the suits may very well have been what killed them, which would make sense given that a Springlock incident would be more agonizing than a simple knife to the chest. And a Springlock collapse would be a more realistic way for the suits to start leaking blood and other fluids, since one knife wound wouldn't really do that, especially around their eyes. Even if the suits didn't snap closed, if William shoved them into the suits, that's close enough for me. Finally, and at number 1, Crying Child. Okay, now this one is going to be controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates in my DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram, not asking about my game's Kickstarter, but rather the Bite of 83, and how it had to have been a Springlocking, bothers me to my core. I say this every time I'm bringing it up. I don't think that this was a Springlock failure. That being said, it's still possible, and that's what this list is about. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning no Springlocks would have a chance of failing. Since, keep in mind, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanism failing to stay open, meaning it snaps back into animatronic mode. That's why it's bad if someone is inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanism in and around the mouth because it would always be in animatronic mode, since the jaw just moves up and down. But nevertheless, it's still a possibility, since logic and physics doesn't seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're electromagnet, they would still be open with power, so if they ran out of power, they would end up closing. Just saying. And at 10, Henry. While Henry does ultimately perish thanks to the FNAF 6 fire, he would have been a target for William beforehand, especially once he had learned who was actually committing the crimes at his restaurants. But why didn't William go after him? It would have been too obvious, really. I mean, there are 5 murders that occur inside the walls of the restaurant. They already suspect William for it, but then Henry goes missing and then William is left as the sole proprietor of the business? That's super suspicious and would definitely result in an arrest. Motive means an opportunity. Motive is absolutely there, especially if William was cheating with Henry's wife or something. Means would be fairly easy to find, and William has plenty of opportunities, let's be honest. So, killing Henry would only result in William going to jail, which probably saved Henry's life. And at 9, Vanny. Vanny is an interesting case here, because while she is in a way a victim of Glitch Trap, she doesn't really know it, or at least is unable to communicate it, only being able to search help on the company computer. Not only that, but William could very well have killed Vanny, but he didn't, opting instead to gain partial control over her. So while she isn't a victim in the traditional sense, I'm sure that there are people who are willing to argue in the comments. So I'm going to make this simple. My list, my rules. Plus, this is a really hard list. There aren't many people who don't end up dying in the FNAF universe, alright? So cut me some slack if a couple of these numbers are iffy to say the least. But Vanny has not yet suffered the ultimate fate of the forever naps, so I'm allowing myself to say that she was almost a victim. Does that mean she isn't going to die? No, I feel like she almost certainly will perish, but she hasn't yet, and that's good enough for me. And at 8, Sammy Emily. Another one that kinda fits if you squint at it and then cough a couple of times. Sammy Emily was in the first 2 FNAF novels Charlie's twin brother who was kidnapped and killed by William Afton. We as the reader and Charlie believe this to be the case for the Silver Eyes as well as the Twisted Ones. However, in the 4th Closet, the 3rd and final book in the novel trilogy, we learn that there is no Sammy Emily. That instead, Charlie was the one who was kidnapped and killed by Afton, and that for all these years every version of Charlie had been a robot designed by Henry and implanted with fake memories. So technically, since Sammy Emily isn't real, they aren't a victim. And if we want to get even more meta with it, they were almost a victim because Scott could have decided to let the story stay that way and not make Charlie a robot. But he didn't. Sure, Sammy could have been a real character. That, or if Sammy was real, they would have been a victim, meaning that since it didn't happen, they were almost a victim. Like I said, this list was hard, but I promise the next ones make more sense. And at 7, Michael Afton. This relies on heavy speculation and assumption. However, if the entered enema is truly what killed Michael's body, then could it be considered a spring locking? We don't really know if the Funtime animatronics have spring locks, but we can assume that they do thanks to their moving parts and abilities like a giant claw that goes out and stores items. But this would also mean that Ennard would have at least some of those same parts. So if the Funtime animatronics that were made around the same time as the original spring lock animatronics used similar parts or techniques, which is likely, that means that Michael Afton would also be a spring lock victim. We don't need solid proof since this is a possible spring locking victims list, so proof of possibility is all I really need. And honestly, I think that this would provide a good explanation as to why he turned purple. Since people who die don't turn purple. Instead, if they rot, they would most likely be depicted as green, especially when another major character is linked to the color purple. So, if that is indeed bruising, it would make sense if the spring lock mechanisms were hurting him from the inside out. And at 6, Indie Game Dev. The Scott Cawthon in-universe stand-in is an interesting character I hope they explore more in the future. But with Scott retiring, could this character meet a grisly fate? It could be that Fazbear Entertainment wants to tie up loose ends while trying to rebuild their reputation, or that maybe they threatened him into making the games in the first place, so they're keeping a close watch on him. I mean, if William learns about what this guy was making, maybe he would feel like he needs to silence the one man who knows too much, or strong-arm him into creating the games after he learned that he knew about the real story behind Fazbear Entertainment. It's entirely possible. It could also be that the indie game dev was the person the FNAF 6 franchise owner job was for, since there was a way out plan for them, and Henry knew at least one other person that knew what was going on. But that person wasn't Michael, as we learned from the final speech, meaning that whoever that was almost a victim as well.
And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you.
Halfway through in at number 5, Garvey. A psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras of Dormitibus, the game from which he hails. Garvey is the penultimate antagonist of Dormitibus, and as a human, he was the man who murdered the missing children. He later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burnt to a permanent death in the Fazbear Fright's fire. Garvey is a more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3. However, he is not William Afton, as the game was released before the name reveal, even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to call it. He crawls on all fours and uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demonic monkey from hell that Satan didn't sanction the creation of. Just look at this thing and tell me that it shouldn't be on this list. If you do, you'll be lying. And at 4, Kelsey. Kelsey, in essence, is the main antagonist to the Fazbear Fright story, the new kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book, 1:35 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. At least, so they thought. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure Kelsey is still there, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows it's someone else, because the hair color's different. And then Devin gets stuck in the suit by his arm and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. This is an interesting story, because while Kelsey did get springlocked, he ends up being fine. So what happened? Some think that Kelsey's a ghost, some think that he's the one you should not have killed, others don't know. But either way, this version of Kelsey, the one who got into the suit, was nearly a victim that somehow survived or escaped. At least, so we think. Getting close to the end into number 3, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Fright story, the new kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book 1:35 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a spring-locked suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the spring-locked suit fails and kills Kelsey. At least, so they thought. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure Kelsey is still there, for some reason, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color's different, and then Devin gets stuck and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. This is an interesting story because while Kelsey did get spring-locked, he ended up being fine. So what happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, while some think that he's the one you should not have killed. But no matter what, we all feel like there is a high possibility that Kelsey was a spring-lock victim, at least when they were alive. We don't know how and we don't know when, but it's a definite possibility. Penultimately, in at number 2, Jeremy Fitzgerald. Jeremy Fitzgerald is the character most assumed suffered the bite of 87, a moment that has been debated since the start of the Five Nights series. While yes, this Jeremy may lose his frontal lobe, he could have lost his life. And I don't know about you, but losing my frontal lobe and getting promoted to day shift and suing that company to get a boatload of money sounds a lot better than death to me. Especially since MatPack concluded that one of the only things that would happen would be your loss of self-preservation and fear. Now I have no idea what an entire frontal lobe being removed would do, but it still sounds better than death, which in my opinion makes this character almost a victim, since if that animatronic had moved even slightly, or Jeremy had been an inch closer, it would have been much worse than it was. Oh yeah. Finally, in at number 1, Casey. Casey's the main character in a Fazbear Fright story I don't know if I've really talked about in detail. I might have mentioned the story here and there, but I don't think there's been a whole number on it. Casey appears in the Fazbear Fright story Dance With Me from Step Closer, the 4th Fazbear Frights book. She ends up stealing some glasses that when worn either reveal or display a Ballora animatronic dancing. Honestly, this is the first character I put on this list and the reason I thought this list was possible, since this entire story revolves around how she was almost a victim of Ballora. Now don't get me wrong, the story is very unclear in this regard, but it's generally assumed that the ending does imply that the little girl who gets the glasses back got snatched by Ballora, who spent the entire story slowly getting closer to Cassie every time she put on those glasses. She returns the glasses to the woman who owns them, and when her daughter ends up putting them on, she's the one who starts dancing. And knowing this series, I highly doubt it's because she was excited to see a 7-foot-tall Ballora dancing right in front of her. Cassie was very nearly caught by Ballora, instead having a little girl take her place. That kid was probably a brat anyway though. I hope it was Braith. And at 10, Henry. Now there are many ways to consider Henry a victim of the purple guy, but he's first because not many of them are as direct as others. While we do see Henry get killed by a baby in FNAF World, in the main series games he lives on in FNAF 6, where he then gets burnt in a fire. Unless baby kills him in the FNAF 6 location before the fire can, since he cut her off earlier, but that's still just speculation. However, Henry was also the victim of purple guy's crimes when Charlotte died, as seen in FNAFs 2 and 6, as well as in the books, since Henry lost his book daughter Charlie to William when she was only 3 years old. Remember, when someone takes a life, the one who dies isn't the only victim. Their family and friends, anyone who loved them, are a victim as well. This also extends to Henry's wife, who we don't know the name of as far as I know, since she may still be alive in the games. And at 9, Gabriel. Gabriel was one of the original 5 missing children from the first ever incident that we learned about in the games. We believe his soul passed into the Freddy animatronic based on the gravestone ending and the placement of the FNAF 3 heads. Gabriel hasn't really ever gotten much of a description, aside from a brief mention in the books, but that description could also be referencing Jeremy, and it's just based on Crying Child from FNAF 4's 8-bit minigames, so there isn't really much validity to it. But I wonder how Gabriel feels about being the mascot of the company in essence, cause with over 25 versions of the character being present throughout the separate games, you're a pretty popular fellow. I originally had a theory that we played as someone named Gabriel in FNAF VR, since we ended up getting stuck into the Freddy animatronic in the pizza party ending, but I think that Gregory from Security Breach will be a better Gabriel comparison, especially with this whole hiding in Glamrock Freddy thing. And it ate Susie. Susie was the first to die, which is pretty horrifying when you think about it, but also kinda liberating if you think about it in another way. Horrifying because, like, you know, you get killed out of nowhere and that sucks hard, but liberating because while yes, you're dead, you also dead, so you don't really have to worry about anything else. Well, I suppose not in this case since they go on to possess the animatronic, but like they don't have to worry about anything in their future, like just getting revenge on their killer, and honestly that sounds like the life. Like not having to pay rent and then just doing everything in your power to stop a serial killer, that sounds like my kind of vacation. But nevertheless, being the first to die is a pretty serious thing. We know she was the first thanks to Withered Chica's voice line in Ultimate Custom Night, and keep in mind that the Withered animatronics are the original ones after being decommissioned when the restaurant closed prior to FNAF 2, since FNAF 2 is still a prequel and one of the first games in the timeline, so she is Withered Chica, even if she's also Chica. Gotta love the games. And at 7, Vanny. Vanny is the planned main antagonist of the next FNAF game, Security Breach. There is not much we know about Vanny, but there are plenty of theories. Some believe Vanny to be the glitch trap controlled version of Vanessa, which would make sense. Some also believe that she was the girl who recorded the tapes in FNAF VR, aptly referred to as Tape Girl, who I literally just mentioned, which would also make sense. And while both of these are probably true, even if they aren't, somehow Vanny did fall under William's control, which in essence makes her a Springtrap victim, even if it was Glitch Trap who was controlling her. But he also would have manifested in that suit because he didn't want to relive the agony of being spring locked, so he was still basically Springtrap. Look, this was a hard list, okay? And I had to add this number at the end. I had to add it so that I had 10 points, okay? So chill for a minute and let me do my thing. And at 6, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was an unintentional victim of the purple guy, given that Elizabeth was in fact his daughter. In the aftermath of his murder den closing, Afton set up shop in a new restaurant he owned called Circus Baby's Pizza World, at least one that he started opening, where the feature animatronics were actually giant murder robots hungry for the flesh of children, because, you know, that's what this series has come to at that point. He warned his kids to stay away from the animatronics, especially his daughter Elizabeth, since she had such a fascination with the main star baby, but she didn't listen, so in a moment of ultimate regret, she done got herself scooped, basically insta-killing her while baby's arm grabbed her, pulled her in, and then crushed her and put her in a storage unit. While he didn't kill her directly, he still killed her, and then even victimized himself since, you know, it was his daughter that got scooped, and William's also a victim because he killed his daughter. But then this leads him to discover possession at the hands of Agony, but I don't think that he knows that it's Agony, but then that completely changes his motive, so he goes on to commit more murders. It's a pivotal death in the purple guy chronology, or story. Halfway through into number 5, Matthew. Remember how earlier I talked about how Springtrap was killing himself in the Springtrap's Revenge VR game in the Fazbear Frights book Bunny Call? Well, not only does he do that, but he also tears the main character Matthew to shreds. Now, some do consider this Matthew to be a reference to MatPat of Game Theory, and it makes sense why. But what makes this bad is that the community considers this an M-Preg fan fiction, which I have to say, I enjoyed not knowing what that was until I had to ask my sister about it because it was everywhere online. She's really into fanfiction, it's kinda concerning. Anyway, basically Matthew in this story gets implanted with a baby Springtrap thanks to a program called itsaboy.exe, which literally ends up tearing him to shreds from the inside out. Hardly a fun experience, I would say. Yet some women go their whole lives wanting to give birth and have kids. But I mean, at least most of the time, they don't kill you from the inside out. Or rather, they don't usually claw at you and dig through your stomach. That's exclusive to Springtrap, I hope. And at 4, Jeremy's. As I said in the Souls Trapped in Animatronics video, Jeremy is one of the biggest troll names in FNAF history, being used for 3 separate characters, which, I mean, doesn't sound like a lot, but for FNAF it is. However, only 2 of them are the direct victims of Purple Guy. Jeremy is the name of one of the original missing children, and as I said earlier, he goes on to possess Bonnie. The other Jeremy is a playtester for the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience, the game we tested in FNAF VR, the one who tested it before Tape Girl, who ends up finding the glitch trap in anomaly and causes him to go mad. And by going mad, I genuinely mean, like, absolutely psycho. Jeremy ends up cutting off his own face. But I mean, like, that's also interesting because, like, Withered Bonnie, the Withered Bonnie animatronic that we see in FNAF 2 is missing his face. And it's weird because Withered Bonnie is the Bonnie that's possessed by the missing children's incident Jeremy. Now, like, I don't know if that means anything or if it's intended or if it's just coincidence, but knowing this series, I'm always worried that, like, the smallest detail is gonna have the biggest consequence. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Gregory. Now, with Security Breach not releasing until late 2021, we can only speculate as to what happens to our next main character and our player, Gregory, in the next Fazbear game. However, it's entirely possible that Gregory ends up getting killed. Think about it. This is literally a kid who is fighting one of the FNAF universe's deadliest child serial killers, who has multiple animatronics out to find him and control over a security guard. Not only that, but it's entirely possible that Glamrock Freddy ends up betraying us and crushing us while we're inside of him. That sounded weird. It's not like we haven't been killed in the games before, or at least horribly mutilated like we were in Sister Location. And we as the player die in FNAF 6 along with Henry. So Scott is not new to killing off the main player in his games. But also, realistically, he's a kid. And like, what's he gonna be able to do against a literal sentient code? And if he lives, there will be someone to tell the cops what happened. And if William was paying them off, he certainly wasn't anymore, so maybe they can have an actual investigation this time. But only if Gregory lives, so he's probably gonna die. Penultimately, in at number 2, Charlotte. Charlotte is one of the most troublesome victims Purple Guy has had. Being the 6th victim, Charlotte gets killed outside the pizzeria, despite desperate attempts from her father, Henry, to prevent this, mainly by creating a security animatronic designed like a puppet to protect other kids but treat her as a priority. You know. He's a parent, I get it. However, when it gets trapped in its box, it's unable to make it out to Charlotte in time to save her. So, in another attempt, the puppet saves her in another way, allowing her agony to reach out and take hold of the animatronic. As the puppet, Charlotte then goes on to share her gift of the second chance with the other animatronics, bringing them to life as well, resulting in William's ultimate undoing. In a way, Charlotte is really the one you should not have killed, since if he had spared her, maybe he wouldn't have lost his life in the end, or been spring-locked. So, yeah, shouldn't have done it. Finally, in at number 1, us. Now, this is why Cassidy isn't number 1. No matter what, we are a victim of the Purple Guy, and not in any philosophical way either. We are a direct victim of the Purple Guy, or William Afton, or Glitch Trap, or whatever you want to call him. Since, thanks to FNAF VR, no matter what you do, you end up losing at the end of the game. You either merge with him and join him on stage, or you complete the ritual only to get locked away in your own mind as William walks free in your body, or, the easier one, we get stuffed into Freddy at the end of the Pizza Party minigame. But if you end up collecting all 16 tapes and actually fully complete the game, you're a victim of the Purple Guy. Like, he uses your body to commit whatever comes next. I mean, we could be Vanny, we could be Tape Girl giving it another shot, we could be some random bystander, but either way, we the player get gotten by this toxic, poisonous grip that is the Purple Guy. So, yeah, I'm gonna put myself at number 1.